Ryan's hand landed on the back of my neck, just as everyone around the dining table finished singing. "Make a wish," someone laughed. Before I could even inhale, my brother shoved my face forward with both hands. The room erupted in cheers, until it didn't. Instead of stopping when my face hit the cake, Ryan kept pushing. My feet slipped on frosting that had fallen onto the hardwood floor. The force threw me sideways, and the side of my head slammed into the sharp corner of the heavy oak table. A loud crack echoed through the room. For a second, nobody moved. Then warm frosting slid down my face. So did something else. Blood. I reached for the table to steady myself, but the room tilted violently. Ryan burst into laughter. "Oh, come on," he said. "It was just horseplay." My mother hurried over, not to help me, but to wipe frosting off the tablecloth. "Tasha," she sighed, "don't make a scene on your own birthday." As my vision blurred, I realized I was the only person in the room who seemed to think something had gone terribly wrong. I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come out correctly. The pounding inside my head drowned out the voices surrounding me. Several relatives finally walked over, but not because they were worried. They were trying to calm everyone else down. "She's okay. She just hit the table. These things happen." Ryan folded his arms and rolled his eyes. "I barely touched her." I looked directly at him. He didn't look frightened. He looked annoyed, as if I had somehow ruined his joke. Someone handed me a towel for the blood running down my cheek. Another relative whispered, "Please don't call an ambulance. The neighbors will think something terrible happened." Something terrible had happened. I just wasn't sure anyone besides me could see it. When I said I needed a hospital, my father frowned. "For a bump on the head." My mother nodded toward Ryan. "Your brother feels awful already. Don't make this bigger than it is." Ryan didn't apologize. He simply grabbed another slice of cake. "I told you," he said with a grin. "She's always been dramatic." Nobody argued with him. Not one person. I left the party alone. The drive to the emergency room felt unreal. Every traffic light seemed brighter than normal. Every turn made my stomach lurch. By the time I reached the hospital, I was struggling to remember simple details. The triage nurse took one look at the swelling near my temple and immediately called for imaging. Within minutes, I was lying inside a CT scanner while technicians spoke in calm, practiced voices. Afterward, I waited in a quiet examination room with an ice pack pressed against my head. The emergency physician entered holding a tablet. He studied the images in complete silence. Longer than I expected. His expression slowly changed. He looked at me, then back at the scan. Without saying another word, he quietly walked out of the room. A few seconds later, I heard the lock click on the examination room door. Not to keep me in. To make sure no one else came in. My heartbeat quickened. Through the narrow window beside the door, I saw two uniformed detectives following the doctor down the hallway. The physician opened the door and motioned them inside. One detective pulled out a chair, sat across from me, and spoke gently. "Ms. Brooks." He glanced at the CT images, still glowing on the monitor. "Has your brother hurt you before?" I stared at the detective, certain he had misunderstood. "My brother," I repeated. "No, it's not like that." He didn't write anything down. He simply watched me. "You don't have to answer quickly," he said. "Take your time." I forced out a nervous laugh. "Ryan and I mess around. He's always been rough. Tonight just got out of hand." The detective exchanged a brief glance with the ER physician. Neither of them looked convinced. The doctor stepped closer to the monitor. "Ms. Brooks, I'm concerned about the injury you received tonight." I nodded weakly. "But," he continued carefully, "I'm even more concerned about something else I found." The room suddenly felt much smaller. "What do you mean?" "I'm waiting on additional imaging before I say more. I don't want to jump to conclusions." His tone remained calm, but there was an unmistakable seriousness behind every word. For the first time since leaving the birthday party, I felt afraid of something beyond the headache pounding inside my skull. While the technicians prepared another scan, the detective stayed with me. He asked simple questions. "When did your brother first become physically rough with you?" I smiled awkwardly. "Oh, we've always wrestled. As children. Yeah. And as adults." I hesitated. "I guess. How often?" "I don't know." Every answer sounded weaker than the last. He wasn't interrogating me. He was asking ordinary questions. Yet somehow I couldn't give ordinary answers. Waiting alone gave me too much time to think. Images I'd buried for years resurfaced one after another. I was 13, sitting on the kitchen floor after Ryan shoved me into a cabinet. "Tell Grandma you slipped," my mother had whispered while handing me a bag of frozen peas. I was 16 when Ryan tackled me into the backyard fence because I refused to give him my car keys. Dad had laughed. Boys play rough. At 22, Ryan grabbed my wrist during Thanksgiving dinner hard enough to leave bruises. When my aunt asked about them a week later, my mother answered before I could. "Tasha bumps into everything." The explanation had become automatic. So automatic that eventually I believed it myself. The detective returned carrying a folder. "Do you remember visiting emergency rooms before?" I frowned. "A couple of times." He read from the paperwork. "Concussion at 23. I nodded slowly. "Broken wrist at 26. I fell. Laceration above your eyebrow at 28. I hit a cabinet." Each explanation sounded rehearsed. Because it was. Not rehearsed for the detective. Rehearsed over years. A nurse entered quietly to check my blood pressure. She hesitated before speaking. "I hope you don't mind me saying something." I looked at her. "I've worked in emergency medicine for 18 years. She adjusted the cuff gently around my arm. "I've heard a lot of people describe injuries exactly the way you're describing yours." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They usually tell us they fell." She paused. "Or that someone was only playing." The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I opened my mouth to disagree. Instead, memories I hadn't questioned in years suddenly looked different. Not accidents. Not jokes. Patterns. For the first time in my life, I wondered whether I'd spent decades protecting someone who had never once tried to protect me. The detective slid a single authorization form across the bedside table. "We'd like permission to review your previous medical records." I stared at the paper. If I signed it, this stopped being about one birthday. It became about my entire life. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. After several long seconds, I signed. The detective quietly thanked me and stepped into the hallway. Nearly 20 minutes later, the ER physician returned. He wasn't carrying my new scan. He was holding an older image retrieved from hospital archives. He placed it beside today's CT scan. He pointed to a faint, healed area near the side of my skull. Then he looked directly at me. "This injury," he said quietly, "didn't happen yesterday." The next morning, while I remained in the hospital under observation, Detectives Harris and Morneau pulled into my parents' driveway. The birthday decorations were still hanging from the porch. Half-deflated balloons drifted in the breeze. Inside, several relatives were finishing breakfast, replaying the previous night's party as if nothing unusual had happened. Ryan opened the front door with a smirk. "Detectives," he said, seriously. He laughed and leaned against the frame. "I guess Tasha really knows how to overreact." Detective Harris held up his badge. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." Ryan shrugged. "Sure, it was a prank, she slipped. Everybody saw it." He stepped aside with complete confidence. As far as he knew, everyone in that house would tell the same story. The detectives gathered the family in the living room. My father spoke first. It was horseplay. My mother nodded immediately. Ryan barely touched her. An uncle chimed in. She lost her balance. Another aunt added, nobody meant for anyone to get hurt. Ryan folded his arms. There you go. He smiled at the detectives. Same story from everyone. Detective Morneau didn't argue. Instead, she calmly said, we're going to speak with each of you individually. Ryan's smile faded. One by one, family members were taken into separate rooms. Without hearing one another's answers, small differences began to appear. One cousin said Ryan pushed me with one hand. Another insisted it was two. Someone claimed I tripped before hitting the cake. Someone else admitted they never actually saw my feet move. The detectives wrote everything down. By the fourth interview, the neat family version had started to unravel. Then they spoke with my 15-year-old cousin, Emily. She sat nervously on the edge of a dining chair, twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Detective Harris spoke gently. You aren't in trouble. Emily nodded, but kept staring at the floor. After a long silence, she whispered. It wasn't funny. The detective waited. Ryan shoved her really hard. She swallowed. A lot harder than everyone keeps saying. Why didn't you tell anyone? Emily's eyes filled with tears. Because Uncle David told us we weren't supposed to. The room went completely quiet. Another relative was less hesitant. My mother's older sister sighed heavily before answering. I told Ryan he needed to apologize. What happened? He said, she looked embarrassed. He said if anyone called police, he'd make sure nobody was invited to family holidays again. Detective Morneau looked up. So people stayed quiet. She nodded. Yes. Meanwhile, detectives requested every cell phone video recorded during the birthday celebration. Several guests had been filming while everyone sang. The videos captured laughter. Candles. The moment Ryan stepped behind me. The exact impact wasn't completely visible because guests blocked parts of the view. But one thing was unmistakable. The force. The table shook. Gasps replaced laughter. And while I struggled to stand, Ryan laughed. The recording continued long enough to capture someone asking, should we call an ambulance? My father's voice answered immediately. No, she's fine. Back at the hospital, Detective Harris showed me only a few seconds of the footage. I couldn't finish watching it. I had remembered confusion. The video showed something much worse. No one rushed toward me. Most of them looked to Ryan first, waiting to see how he reacted before deciding how serious my injury really was. I finally understood why I'd felt so alone. I wasn't imagining it. They had chosen him. Later that afternoon, Ryan called my phone. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. Tasha, are you kidding me? Detectives are going through Mom and Dad's house because of you. Call them and tell them this was an accident. I deleted the message without replying. For the first time in years, I wasn't protecting him. As investigators continued reviewing my medical history, they noticed something unsettling. Emergency room visits, urgent care records, orthopedic appointments, neurology consultations. Again and again, Ryan's name appeared somewhere in the explanation. Each visit had been dismissed as an isolated accident. Together, they looked like a pattern. Detective Morneau returned to my room. We've obtained a search warrant. For what? She looked directly at me. Anything that helps us determine whether this really started last night. Hours later, Ryan stood silently on the front lawn as officers carried sealed evidence boxes out of my parents' house. Family photo albums, old medical files, storage boxes from the attic. Ryan's confident smile was gone. He watched every box disappear into the detective's vehicle without saying a word. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. The headaches hadn't gone away. Bright lights still made me nauseous, and simple conversations exhausted me. But Detective Harris called before I even made it home. "We've started comparing your current records with everything we recovered." "What did you find?" There was a brief pause. "A lot more than we expected." The investigation expanded quickly. A forensic radiologist reviewed my new CT scan alongside older imaging from hospitals I had visited over the years. He prepared a timeline. Concussion, healed skull fracture, facial fracture, 2 separate rib injuries, a wrist fracture. Each incident had been recorded years apart. Each had been explained as an accident. Yet the injury patterns didn't match the stories written in the medical charts. The specialists reached the same conclusion. Individually, they could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern of repeated blunt force trauma. Detectives laid the timeline across a conference table. Colored markers connected each injury to a family gathering. A Thanksgiving dinner, a 4th of July cookout, a Christmas celebration, a graduation party. Now, my 31st birthday. Detective Morneau stared at the chart. Almost every major injury happened when Ryan was present. No one in the room spoke for several seconds. The detectives then visited neighbors who had lived beside my parents years earlier. Most remembered the Brooks family as friendly, but one elderly neighbor hesitated before answering. I remember hearing arguments. "What kind of arguments?" Detective Harris asked. "The kind where a young woman cried." He looked toward my childhood home. Then everything would suddenly go quiet. "Did you ever see anything?" "Once." He folded his hands. "I saw Tasha outside with blood on her lip." "What happened?" "Her mother told me she'd fallen off a bicycle." He frowned. There wasn't a bicycle anywhere. The investigation reached my former family physician. He carefully reviewed decades-old files before meeting with detectives. I documented concerns more than once. Detective Morneau looked up. "What kind of concerns?" The explanations didn't fit the injuries. "Why didn't anything happen?" The doctor sighed. Both parents consistently insisted the injuries were accidental. He closed the file. Without disclosure from the patient or another witness, there wasn't enough to report at the time. Ryan hired a criminal defense attorney. Almost immediately, the phone calls from my parents began. My mother cried through the first one. "Tasha, please." I remained silent. "Your brother could lose everything." I finally answered. "He almost took everything from me." She ignored the comment. "If you keep cooperating, this family will never recover." I looked around my quiet apartment. "What family?" She hung up. The next day, my father came in person. He stood outside my apartment building carrying flowers. "I know Ryan has a temper." "A temper? He didn't mean to hurt you." I folded my arms. "How many times have you said that?" His eyes dropped to the ground. "You don't understand." "No," I replied calmly. "I finally do." I closed the door. It was the first conversation in my life that ended without me apologizing. Detectives asked for one more thing. "Do you still have your old phone backups?" "I think so." "We'd like to review your messages." I handed over everything. Years of texts, family group chats, voicemails, archived conversations. I had never imagined they would matter. They mattered more than I realized. Days later, Detective Harris returned carrying printed copies. He spread them across my dining table. Message after message appeared in my mother's handwriting. Don't tell the doctor Ryan pushed you. Just say you slipped. Families solve problems at home. Your brother didn't mean it. Then messages from relatives. Please don't report this. Your parents are already stressed. Think about Ryan's future. Every apology had the same hidden request. Protect him, no matter what it cost me. The investigation team now viewed the birthday assault differently. It wasn't the beginning of the case. It was the first incident no one could successfully explain away. Years of isolated accidents had finally connected into a single, undeniable pattern. Ryan's attorney requested copies of the evidence. When he saw the growing file, his strategy changed almost immediately. Instead of arguing that nothing had happened, he began arguing that everything had been misunderstood. But the evidence was no longer depending on one witness. It was depending on years of records, medical findings, videos, messages, independent interviews. Each piece strengthened the next. A week later, Detective Morneau arrived with another investigator. We've recovered something else. She carried a small evidence bag containing an old digital camcorder and a memory card. It came from a storage box in your parents' attic. I stared at it. I don't remember that. We didn't either. She looked toward the investigator standing beside her. He carefully connected the device to a laptop. As the screen flickered to life, he froze. Then he slowly turned toward us. You all need to see what's on this tape. The video began with a date stamp from nearly 9 years earlier. It was another family birthday. The camera shook as someone laughed behind the lens. Children ran through the backyard. Music played from a portable speaker. For a few seconds, it looked like an ordinary celebration. Then Ryan walked into the frame. I watched my younger self carrying a tray of drinks across the patio. Ryan stepped in front of me. He said something the camera couldn't quite pick up. I tried to walk around him. He shoved me. Hard. I stumbled backward into a stone planter, striking the side of my head before collapsing onto the ground. The camera jerked downward. Someone gasped. Then my mother's voice filled the recording. Turn that off. The screen went black. Detective Harris let the silence settle. That wasn't the only recording. He opened another file. This one had been captured a few minutes later. The camera had accidentally started recording again while lying inside a bag. No one realized it was still running. The video showed only darkness, but the audio was unmistakable. My father spoke first. She's awake. My mother answered immediately. Nobody says Ryan pushed her. Someone asked if they should call an ambulance. No, my father replied. We'll tell everyone she slipped. Then came Ryan's voice. They'll believe it. The recording ended. No one in the room said a word. Everything investigators had uncovered suddenly fit together. The CT scan had raised the first alarm because it revealed more than a recent concussion. It showed signs of older, healed injuries that could not be explained by a single accident. My historical medical records documented repeated fractures and head injuries. Witness interviews exposed inconsistent stories. Cell phone footage from my birthday contradicted the family's version of events. Years of text messages showed repeated efforts to persuade me to lie. And now, the recovered home video captured the family agreeing to conceal an earlier assault. What had looked like isolated accidents was, in reality, a long pattern of violence followed by deliberate deception. The birthday wasn't the entire case. It was the moment the pattern could no longer stay hidden. A few days later, detectives asked me to come to the station. They wanted me present when they informed me of the formal charges. Ryan was arrested for the birthday assault. As prosecutors reviewed the evidence, additional charges were filed based on earlier incidents that could now be supported by medical records, witness statements, and recovered evidence. When officers placed him in handcuffs outside the courthouse, he looked toward me for the first time since my birthday. "You really did this?" His voice wasn't angry. It was stunned. I met his eyes. "No," I answered quietly. "You did." He looked away. My parents faced consequences of their own. Investigators determined they had repeatedly provided false information to medical professionals and investigators while attempting to conceal Ryan's assaults. What they had always called protecting the family was now being examined as obstruction during the investigation. When detectives explained the evidence, my mother cried. My father sat motionless. Neither of them tried to tell me I was overreacting anymore. For the first time, there were no excuses. Only facts. Not everyone in the family walked away. Several relatives contacted me after the arrests. Emily, my younger cousin, visited with her parents. She hugged me carefully, mindful of my recovery. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet." "You were a kid," I told her. "You weren't responsible for fixing what the adults refused to face." An aunt who had repeated my parents' stories for years called to apologize. I should have believed what I saw instead of what I was told. Some relationships slowly began to heal. Others ended completely. A few relatives still insisted Ryan had simply made a mistake. I wished them well. Then I stopped answering their calls. Recovery wasn't quick. Physical therapy helped with my balance. Neurological rehabilitation improved my concentration. Some days I could read for hours. Other days, a short conversation left me exhausted. When I finally returned to work as a pediatric occupational therapist, my coworkers welcomed me without asking me to pretend everything was normal. One afternoon, a young patient became frustrated during therapy. "I keep falling," he said. "You'll get stronger," I told him. "We take healing one step at a time." As I said the words, I realized I was finally believing them myself. Months later, my birthday arrived again. This time, there was no large family gathering. No pressure. No pretending. A few close friends met me at a quiet restaurant. Someone placed a small cake in front of me. They smiled. "You get the first slice." No one reached for my chair. No one stood behind me. Everyone waited. I leaned forward, blew out the candles, and laughed for the first time on my birthday in years. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I no longer had to live inside the lie that had protected someone else's violence. The birthday that nearly destroyed my life became the day everyone finally stopped calling it horseplay and started calling it exactly what it was: